Welcome everyone to the podcast. So today we have our returning guest, very special person who's making us laugh a lot, Alastair Hay, a homeopathic practitioner who is based out of Portsmouth in the UK. Did I get that right?
You did, yes. Well done.
Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm
Welcome,
honoured that you
Alastair.
had me back.
Yeah, we
Is that-
were excited to have you back because, as you can tell, we're like in high spirits from all the jokes you've been cracking. Okay, so we have, as always, a lot to cover and not enough time to do it. So let's try to cover a little bit more today. So Alistair, we wanted to talk to you today about, I guess, our skin, skin conditions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, not to make it a jokey topic, but so, a lot of people suffer from eczema and skin conditions. And we read on the National Library of Medicine that in the UK, there's a high prevalence of atopic dermatitis, which is also known as atopic eczema. And approximately 11 to 20% of children get affected by it, and 5 to 10% adults. Is this something that you see often with your clients or your clients?
I'm just writing that down, actually. Just sort of, I'm quite a visual person, so if I see it written down, I go, is that representative of my clients? Yeah, I'd say absolutely. There are many more children I see with eczema than I do adults.
And in your current practice, like we were discussing before about, specialities, etc. And you were saying that it's not something you go by, but you've noticed that people usually come to you with a specific, or someone refers you when there's a pathology. Is that correct?
And I have got a degree in physiology and pharmacology, which is what I did before retraining as a homeopath. So my understanding of how conventional medicines modify physiological systems is pretty good. Also, I'm not scared of that, so making sure that homeopathic medicines work with that and it's not negatively challenging. So yeah, I revel in those sort of cases.
I'm not very much, aware or knowledgeable on the topic, but when we were doing this research, where we know quite a lot of people have been developing eczema, sometimes around my family or friends, it's really because they're stressed and they would develop this redness either around joints, etc. And so I usually see this. But is all type of skin issues like redness, is eczema called eczema?
Not particularly. It has to fulfill particular ticky box criteria to then be labeled as eczema. I mean, eczema is a form of dermatitis. Anything that ends in itis just means inflammation of. So the dermis is the skin, and when it's inflamed, that would be a dermatitis. There are different forms of eczema that fulfill other criteria. That means it's not just dermatitis, but it has more and more criteria to say we will call it that. But it's notoriously difficult from a conventional medicine perspective to diagnose particular skin complaints. I mean, luckily, it's not for me to diagnose. Someone says I've got this complaint, it might well already have been diagnosed, but I'd be looking at the sort of minutiae of what makes it better, what makes it worse, and so on and so forth, to then prescribe on the symptoms, that how someone is expressing it. You mentioned about the distribution of it. Eczema typically will be on the sort of inside folds, and psoriasis will be on the outside fold. These are called the flexor surfaces, because that's where it flexes, and those are the extensor surfaces. But it doesn't mean their body has read the rule book. You can find eczema will be, but that would be quite typical. What's actually more fascinating to someone like myself is when someone's symptoms are atypical. They're not as you would expect them to be. So, there are people for whom I've seen that have been diagnosed as having eczema and say, do you know what feels really good? If I put really hot water on my skin, if I want to put, it feels burning and I want to put something really hot on it, that's quite unusual. And then in homeopathic literature, you can find there's very few homeopathic remedies that would fulfill that particular or have that resonance with that kind of symptom. Whereas if someone's got eczema, it's in their usual places, it's worse at night, it's hot, it's itchy, it's red. There's loads of homeopathic remedies that cover that. So we have to say, what makes it unusual? But just as much as you said with respect to emotional state, stresses, strains, that sort of stuff, then yeah, these things, we break at our weakest link. And that, for a lot of people, certainly when you're young, is your skin.
Sorry. So I heard you say earlier, some people misunderstand between eczema and psoriasis. So what is the difference between the two?
Typically they can look quite different, although they can look quite similar. I mean, typically psoriasis is on the outside surfaces and eczema on the inside surfaces, but I've seen a psoriasis case recently where it's pretty much all over their body. It's, they're covered in it. How it's been diagnosed as psoriasis with this particular person is what it looks like. The skin is thickened. It's sort of the way in which the cells are being laid down in the skin is it sort of the cells are being produced from the base layer of your skin more quickly. So immature cells get to the surface more quickly. Those are harder. I think that it's described as more keratinized. So that's how that expresses itself. Sometimes the treatments for both those skin complaints can actually be quite similar. Sometimes they're different. Sometimes they're similar. So I could have someone who's come presenting with psoriasis, but the person is quite similar to someone else who's got eczema in terms of how it's come about, the stresses and strains in their life, and they'll have a similar remedy, but it could be quite different, in terms of its expression in the person. So they would have different remedies, but in terms of its origins from a medical or physiological perspective, they're quite different in terms of how the origins of them. So that they're certainly not the same in that sense, but they're both expressed on the skin nearly always.
So is it just stress that causes or triggers it to flare up, the inflammation, or what are the factors that we generally trigger eczema or the skin inflammation?
I'd put it down to probably one or all three factors that could be the sort of deciding factors of whether your skin is going to break out. First of all is family history. If you've got a family history of where your skin breaks out, then you are probably more likely for that to happen. Eczema has this reputation of having a genetic familiarity to it. Next thing is environment. We can be putting things on our skin that is going to irritate it, and if you already have that susceptibility, then it's more likely to break out than the next person who doesn't have that susceptibility. And finally, the personality. What is if you're finding, we were talking about road rage before we had this part of the interview, and actually, if you go around furious the whole time, there is going to be inflammation going on somewhere, isn't there? You're going to feel inflamed. Now, for some people, that inflammation will come out in their skin. For some people, that'll come out in their guts. For some people, that will come out in their language, or as well. It's actually, you'll be behaving in an inflamed fashion.
Yeah.
What I find interesting with the statistic you first gave me was actually the sort of percentage of children that have skin issues, eczema in particular, compared to adults. And I think what I find interesting about that is actually the skin as an organ is actually further away from our major organs than our heart, our liver, our kidneys, our brain. It's usually the first place in which we will express a disorder on our skin. As we get older, we will have suppressed those symptoms, we'll have pushed them deeper, and we'll have deeper and deeper things go wrong with us. So if an adult's presenting complaint is eczema and nothing else about them has gone wrong in terms of these more major organs, they're probably quite healthy on a sort of more holistic level. Sometimes the skin can express itself with issues if the liver is not doing very well, and so on and so forth. But once you go into that, if that's where your body breaks, if we're like a chain and you pull that and it breaks at that weakest link, if that weakest link for you is your skin, that's not bad. It's not like you have any stress and suddenly you have a heart attack, or you go into liver failure, or you get a stroke. Those are much more major things. That's not to say eczema isn't particularly bad. The skin can get infected and all hell can break loose.
That's a very interesting way to see that. My interpretation, or one way to think as like a mom, like, a young mother, if you see your child developing eczema or developing some redness on your skin, sometimes the kid doesn't know how to tell you how to communicate what's going on. And sometimes I feel it's a sign for you to potentially look in another way, or it's their way to say like something's going on. In this particular example where I have this mother that is taking her son that is acting up as well a little bit, and is not really able to express himself because he's in this age where he can express, but he wouldn't be able to express his emotions, and started having patches on his back, on his hands, on his arms, and and as a mom, she knows that something's going on. She know that because she's a very conscious mother, she know
Yeah.
that some events might have affected him, and so that's why she decided to go to a homeopath. But say you have a presenting case that presenting symptoms that is just those patches. How do you go about analyzing this so that you give them the right remedies?
The conclusion about whether something is the right remedy or not is based on someone's response to it. And on paper, it might look like the right remedy, but in practice, if it doesn't work, it wasn't the right remedy. I'm thinking of an example where this lad was a baby in arms, and well, I'm jumping the gun a bit. He'd actually seen lots of other practitioners, and you look at the skin on face value, and it was a sulfur case. The distribution of the skin, what made it better, what made it worse, it was hot, it was red, it was worse at night. If he washed it or got water on it, that made it worse. This ticks every single box for sulfur. He'd had sulfur till it was coming out of his ears, made no difference. So if you're just looking at the skin, well, why isn't he responding to homeopathy? It was only until we delved a little bit deeper into the consultation, I said, when did it first start? And this kid was probably about 15 when I saw him. So he'd had it for all of his life. He was 15, and he'd had it very soon after he was born. And I said to his mum in the consultation, can you think of anything that sort of happened that might have brought this on? And she went, well, there is this one thing. I don't know whether it's related, but she said, well, I was involved in an armed robbery, and my baby was, and the child was in my arms. Someone's pointing a gun at your head, basically says, empty the safe. The gun isn't pointed at the child, but the gun is pointed at the mother. You're in that energy sphere. You're in that space, and you must be. I can't even begin to what that must feel like, but you'd be absolutely petrified.
Yeah.
With that information, I then prescribed a homeopathic remedy that was for terror. It's not even known as a remedy for eczema that I prescribed. And his eczema got better very, very quickly after that. Within weeks, it was 50% better. But a couple of weeks, it was 50% better. Prescribing on ailments from terror.
So what?
It was a terrifying situation. So you can see you can see the symptoms on the surface and go, that's a sulfur case. Didn't do anything.
Right.
But actually knowing a bit more about why on earth someone would have that, and sulfur doesn't work, you need to know what is, why would this happen? And there wasn't really much family history of eczema either. Some allergies, that sort of stuff. So it was very intriguing. But without that information, I would never have thought of prescribing that remedy.
Right.
So with respect to your
what is
friend,
a remedy for horror?
well, that particular case, I think I prescribed aconite for terror. It would be, it's used for things like earthquake situations, people being involved in those sort of things. There are other remedies that can be used for that, but aconite seemed to fit the bill, because basically I was almost prescribing through the mother how she felt in that situation. Was him being within that. That's what I chose to prescribe.
And aconite, where do you find that type of raw materials? Like, is the pharmacy providing this?
Well, I within the UK, the remedies are made by homeopathic pharmacy. There's 6 homeopathic pharmacies in the UK. The people making homeopathic medicines are pharmacists who've retrained as homeopaths to make homeopathic medicines. Aconite in its material form is poisonous. When it's made into a homeopathic medicine, it's been shaken and diluted a lot to make it into that medicine, and then it's been tested on a bunch of healthy people, produce symptoms, blah blah blah. That sort of stuff. I wouldn't. I think we've got some growing in our garden, but I'm never going to pick it up and eat it. It'll kill me.
Right. I'm just trying to compare the principle of saying the raw material in a homeopathic remedy is toxic, but processed and put in a certain format is then can be consumed, right? Given in a specific setting.
Well, not every homeopathic medicine in its raw state is going to be toxic. The other remedy that I showed you is natriumur. That's sodium chloride. That's salt as a homeopathic remedy. To consider salt as toxic might sound ridiculous, but we could have too much salt.
Yeah.
There is that, pretty much every substance has the equivalent of a lethal amount of it that would wipe out 50% of the people who take it. When you're researching drugs, poisons, you have what's called an ED50 and an LD50, effective dose and lethal dose of something, and you want to get the window right to have a therapeutic value. This is from a sort of more, toxicological, medicinal perspective, as I was learning as a physiologist and a pharmacologist. I'm just thinking of a case in particular where a child had eczema. They were a little bit older than this case, I think, from what you're talking about. This child was about 5, and I sort of posed this question. I said, "So why do you think you've got eczema then?" And this girl said, "It's because my parents keep arguing all the time."
Mm.
I looked at the parents, and they were like, "Well, it's like this child was actually expressing their parents' anger because they couldn't say, 'Well, I'm going to bang your heads together,' that sort of stuff. There was none of that kind of. They couldn't. The angst in the family was being expressed through that child. That's a bit more tricky to deal with from my perspective, because there is a dynamic that needs to be shifted. And I did prescribe for the child, and only that child said, "Well, look, if it doesn't get better, then we need to look at how perhaps as a couple they could see someone else that could then help with their own sort of relationship situation that is not homeopathy and not my area of expertise in this." I felt like they sort of needed some kind of relationship counseling, that sort of stuff. But the child did get better. They were able to express why it was annoying them. The parents, they were passionate people that just, if you're going to do that, just make sure it's not within earshot of your child, because the child was misinterpreting how a discussion with passion was not actually arguing, they're just debating. So the homeopathic remedy just helped them not feel that they were going to be, their parents were going to split up, or that they were going to, just understand it, so the child was able to express, "Are you arguing?" "No, we're just going, oh, thank you." Just that sort of reassurance, just a homeopathic remedy. And then of course their skin got better.
Yeah. That is very interesting for children to kind of like express this dynamic in the environment. And it's also kind of tricky, because I guess as a homeopath, then for you, if you're just say you're unable to, even with the prescription of seeing couples therapists with the parents and then giving what you need to give to the child, like how would you navigate it if the child still persisted with the symptoms?
Well, it has happened in consultations where you have to tread carefully. You can't say, "I think it's you." It's actually, you can pose a question, how do you think it would be if this happened? Do you think that would be, what difference do you think that would make to the environment in which this person is? Or you can put someone in the child's shoes. Imagine you're sitting at the dinner table with your family, and this occurs. You're being a parent, but actually they're talking about stuff you don't understand. They're perhaps being quite loud about it. How would you feel in that situation? And you might even find that they were in that situation and they'd forgotten, or they might go, "You know what, actually that might need sorting out." Sometimes they might say, "Well, actually they'll have a consultation with me," or actually there's someone else that they would like to see. And that has occurred. I've got people who I see, for which I see the mother and the daughter in this particular instance, where both are having help. Child has eczema, the mother has other symptoms. But initially it was the child that was the one who was having the consultations, but the mother was able to recognize that their influence and input in the environment in which the child is growing up is, they sort of came out with the idea that actually, if I am more well, I am more well for my daughter.
Definitely.
In that particular scenario. But if I felt that someone else was better, as this other couple I was mentioning, that I said, "Look, I know this great relationship counselor, I think you should have a word with them." They actually asked if I would do it. I'm like, "Well, actually, no, I'm not the expert in that." Whereas I know someone who is. So that's what we did, and everyone's getting better. That's lovely to see where both the child and the parents, it's like that the healing has been turbocharged. It's wonderful to see that.
Awesome.
Because everyone's working on their own health and well-being.
Definitely. And as a family, you because you are sharing the same space, and because whatever you're saying or could affect every members differently. Even your healing process is such a holistic process. And I think that what we've seen in this episode is really that there is a presenting, aspect, which is eczema or skin redness, but there are different elements that come in why it's triggered.
With respect to this child who had eczema from a baby, the situation was, what have you got? Well, it's been diagnosed as eczema. Who's got it? Well, it's someone who's 15. I've had it since such and such. But the why was the clincher in this particular case.
Right.
Until we knew the why, because we knew who he was, until we knew the why, we weren't getting anywhere. No one else was getting anywhere. And if I hadn't have known the why, then I don't think we'd have got anywhere. And in fact, my taglines for my brand have gone the same sort of way, with it starting off with being the what, the who, and the why in terms of what the tagline has been. I just realised that actually.
So what's your tagline?
Tagline now. Well, so the who was helping people get well and stay well. It says homeopathic health, helping you get well and stay well. That's what I do. How was as is the slightly older tagline in here, which is it says bringing homeopathy to you. That's how. Home visiting homeopath. How we're going to have a consultation in your home, or quite often these days online. But the latest tagline, which is over the last sort of couple of years or so, is actually you are nature. That's why I do it. I believe in nature. I believe in that nature always wins. Things might get in the way of that, stuff like that, but actually we're just coming into autumn in the UK and actually seeing what the plants are doing, seeing what is happening in terms of the seasons, and we try and defy that. We try and still live as if it's the height of summer. That's not going to end very well, which reminds me I need to go to bed earlier.
We all do.
yeah, or get up later. So nature is amazing, and we take ourselves further and further away from that, with what we eat, with what we watch, with what we do, with how we travel, and so on and so forth. And what I love to do is embrace that and encourage people to acknowledge that with this you are nature thing. And homeopathy is wonderful at tapping into that, stimulating your body to heal itself. That is a natural instinct for your body to do.
I mean, I guess from what you're saying basically is for people like patients and practitioners to remain open and curious, and at the same time, I guess agile enough to pivot when the situation calls for it.
The curiosity without judgment is something that I encourage people to do when I'm teaching other practitioners. Is actually to be curious but without judgment. Is actually the level of inquiry is actually just because I'd like to know to help you, rather than going, you did what? That is not right. People will make decisions that they felt was right at the time. It's not for us to judge that. If they regret doing that, you might ask, well, would you do it again? What did you learn from that experience? We've all done crazy stuff, but we might not decide to do it again. I speak for us. But curious without judgment.
That's a nice way to end our conversation.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Alastair. We were really excited and happy to have you back.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Cheers.
Thank you, Alastair.
Thank you.